context setting, before I hand this, I'll become very familiar, and that's our 10-year financial forecast. I think this is important to open with this slide because we are proposing or evaluating the potential of a financial decision. And as part of the priority setting session, the council did direct us to look at other revenue opportunities and bring back at the appropriate time options for the council to consider that stabilize our 10-year outlook. With that said, any decision that you make should be complementary, and where it's competing, we should be able to understand those competing efforts as they relate to revenue opportunities that we seek. I think this slide says that as we go forward, we have a deep interest in protecting the general fund, as well as looking at the assumptions that any programs or options that come before the council that may impact the general fund and surfacing those so that you can make an informed decision. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Manuel.
Yeah, thank you, Deanna. And of course, when we talk finances and fiscal challenges, one of the key components of that is our list of unfunded projects and infrastructure that we have in the city. That includes some major elements like public facilities, streets, and as well as one of the key items we're talking about today, which is parks and recreation. From a public facilities perspective, we do have some major items that are going to have to be looked at as we move forward. Things like Civic Center, repair and rehab. Certainly some work at the corporation yard will be necessary. Looking at some of our fire stations, they have gotten older over the years, and some of them will need work at some point in the future. And of course, you'll be digging into the convention center starting next week. Related to other infrastructure, there's a lot of things that people don't notice on a regular basis, but of course, if something's not working, they will notice pretty quickly. Things like pump station repair, both for our storm and sanitary sewers, our storm drain maintenance, and of course, something we get a lot of feedback on that we want to maintain as well as possible, which is streets maintenance. And we're always looking for funding for additional transportation improvements, whether they're vehicle, pedestrian, or bike. We also have our parks and recreation. We will be coming to you late March with what's commonly known as the Kitchell Report, which talks about the buildings, parks and buildings that need repair and the cost associated with that. And that number is going to be in the $150 million range. We always want to look at opportunities to acquire parkland. And of course, the two facilities we're talking about today. One, the International Swim Center, which is now 52 years old. It's about 75,000 square feet and functions at about 26% cost recovery. And the CRC, or Community Recreation Center, which is now 43 years old, is almost a 30,000 square foot facility and functions at a 44% cost recovery. That means that our operations, that's what the cost recovery is, meaning that the general fund subsidizes operations at about $2 million a year every year. In addition, I do want to highlight that there's currently no funding identified to do any significant upgrades to the ISC or the CRC. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Richard Kerrigan with PFAL to introduce his team and talk a little bit about the study and the findings.
Good. I hope they're a little more positive than what we just heard. On a more positive note, yes.
Is this on? Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be back, and the PFAL team is here tonight with some of our sub-consultants. So we've been busy at work since our last study session back in July. So we've had some really good community engagement throughout the last 10 months, and our team's been busy with a lot of detailed analysis. So tonight we're going to touch on all of that tonight. So just in terms of the context of the project itself, just to remind people, the International Swim Center, Community Recreation Center, and the International Swim Hall of Fame project with related parking is proposed in Central Park, just off Colley Boulevard. In terms of the overall size and scale, in terms of the existing ISC, the current design is about 60% greater. The CRC is about 4% or 4 times larger than the current CRC facilities. And the overall design today, based on an efficient design, uses the same footprint. It's 3-acre footprint than is currently occupied in the ISC. So that's the context of kind of what we're looking at today. In terms of our study focus since July, we reported that the overall project cost in terms of construction and design was $252 million. So one of the key elements of our analysis to look at, was that affordable for the city? And we also had the second key element we had to look at was different funding options. So both public and private funding options of how to deliver a project of this scale. And the third key element was to look at how do you deliver the project. So what's the best way to manage and deliver a product of this scale and nature, not just how to construct it and design it, but how to think about managing the long-term operations and life cycle issues of an asset like this. So just in terms of our overall objective of our work was to look at this as independent and objective perspective with a lot of detailed research and analysis so that we could be confident in our recommendations and conclusions. And also to make sure that we're thinking about this project and what's in the best interest of the city and taxpayers of the city of Santa Clara. In terms of our overall team, there was 21 experts in our team, each different roles and responsibilities, but it's important to note that beyond PFAL, we had 9 other sub-consultants. We worked over 3,500 hours on our teamwork, so we spent an awful lot of work and effort and brought expertise to this process that we want to bring to you tonight. Next slide. So just in terms of the overall project history, just to kind of remind the group how we got to this point. Back in 2013, the City Council adopted a goal to enhance community recreation and sports assets within the city with a specific objective to look at replacing the existing ISC and CRC facilities, recognising that the current ISC is in a state of disrepair. And I think Manuel mentioned about the Kitchen report that's coming out. So in terms of actually looking for a solution for that project is one of the key elements that City Council adopted back in 2013. Then we moved into 2014. There was a preliminary design and feasibility study that went through the environmental process that led to PFAL being hired back in 2017. And with our main goals and objectives were to focus on the affordability and how to deliver the project. So we've had extensive amount of community engagement in the last 10 months. And I'll report on some of those details, but overall it's been a very positive experience. Very much grateful for the staff at the city in terms of the amount of information and cooperation that we've had until this point. So in terms of where we left back in July 2017, these were the key questions that we were posed to respond to, and tonight we're going to share our findings on these. So looking at what size project can the city afford, and that's looking at not just how to build, how much can the city afford just to construct the project, but what can the city afford in terms of long-term operations and maintenance as well. And we developed a financial model to look at the range of alternatives. The second key element was how should the city fund the project and what funding sources are viable. So we looked at over 7 different funding sources, some public, some private. And we were, just to give you an example, one of the elements we looked at was donations. So we sent out over 475 invitations to donors to seek their input on possibly donating to a product like this. So just to give you an extent of the level of effort that we went into looking at all these different elements. The third key element or question we had to look at was around specific tax measures with the community support. So we had a number of elements of how we tackle that question. We conducted 2 poll surveys, one in June and one in September. And that was having a poll survey with over 1,000 residents in Santa Clara. We're going to share the results of that tonight. We also had an open city hall survey, which is online for about a month. There was over 400 different viewers that looked at that, 275 different respondents and over 12 hours of public comment. We had 4 different community meetings that were well attended. We had a 2-day pop-up at the Art and Wine Festival, and we had about 8 different stakeholder meetings with commissions, interested parties, and the clubs and other relevant players in this project. So we had an extensive effort in terms of tackling question 3. I think question 4 was what's the optimal way to deliver the project? Back in July, we did report on 4 case studies, which were 4 detailed case studies in how different cities and public agencies have tackled different projects of this nature. We also had about 8 different workshops with city staff looking at goals, objectives, and risks. And we also brought our extensive team expertise to this mandate in terms of figuring out what's the best way to deliver a project of this nature. So to kind of move on to what are our initial findings. So in terms of the overall funding options, again, just to remind you of the project scale, is $252 million for the new project. here's a highlight summary of the different funding sources that we looked at. And in summary, there was none of these funding sources were a major contributor to be able to fund a project of this cost. So in terms of the capital funding available for the project was not sufficient. So that meant that a new major funding source will be required to fund a project of this scale. Then Manuel touched on the different operation characteristics of the existing facilities as they are today, which are on the lower end of the spectrum. And obviously, if you're continuing with a new project, continuing as a business as usual approach in this sort of cost recovery profile wouldn't be recommended. So, and we've looked at different ways that are, and others prior to us have looked at different ways about how do you achieve a higher level of cost recovery. And we're going to talk through some of those elements today. But the important thing to know about cost recovery is looking at this project as an opportunity and a new way to build stronger partnerships and active partnerships that's in the best interest of the city, the users, and the taxpayers for a product like this longer term. So a lot of the issues that in terms of achieving cost recovery are not equally weighted. Some are more important than others, but we're going to go through each of those. But it's important to understand that achieving a higher level of cost recovery is in the best interest of the product itself, so we don't get into a deferred maintenance or major liability issue in the longer term nature of the project. So some of these elements in terms of how could we achieve a higher cost recovery, these are some of the top 3 elements that we looked at. Looking at the agreements with the existing club users of the existing ISC, and looking at the agreement with the International Swim Hall of Fame, and also understanding how the city would want to participate in a project of this nature and what sort of programs and role the city wants to play if a project like this moves forward. But it's really understanding how these partnerships with these key players can work together in a stronger and active and positive way to make sure that the product is successful longer term. And then some of the other elements that we looked at, a little bit more detail here, but overall this is based on a number of the survey information that we did with community users. We asked them in terms of what levels of fees are we willing to accept, and also some of the poll information that we looked at, and also our market expertise in terms of how you can manage and operate a facility like this. And there's a number of elements here that we looked at that are different to what the city currently does today, but it's an opportunity to enhance that cost recovery perspective. In terms of then the affordability issues, to summarize, there's a limited viable funding options to construct, operate, and maintain a facility of this scope in terms of the $250 million scope. And it requires a significant amount of changes in terms of achieving a higher cost recovery perspective than what is currently happening in the existing facilities. And a larger facility obviously means larger operations and maintenance costs. And that's part of our work and due diligence to look at how do you better manage those costs over the longer term. And then the last and key element, one of the key elements is looking at a major funding source to fund the construction of the project. So in terms of our findings from the affordability perspective, the current design is not affordable. Even with the new tax measure, given the project would consume the majority of that tax measure as a current scale and scope, means that that current design is not affordable. So with a new funding source, we've determined that there's an affordability limit that is a right-sized project that would be viable to move forward, and that aligns also with the community feedback that we heard through the public meetings as well as the polling. So this all feeds into what we call a right-sized project to be able to move forward with. And the polls that we did do in June and September did support comprehensive park and tax, or comprehensive parks tax measure, which did include the ISC and CRC. There was limited support for a tax measure that only focused on the ISC and CRC. So again, this was important feedback that we got from the community that's going to help shape how we move this process forward. And then to speak a little bit more specifically about what tax measures we assessed, this is a sales tax measure. If we can point to some of the graphics on the chart, the 71% and the 64%, the 71% basically says what the overall support would be for a sales tax measure for a 1/4 cent increase, and recognizing that a 2/3 majority support would be needed to pass a measure like that. That wouldn't actually pass under that current polling data. We also looked at a bond measure for a property tax measure, and if you can draw your attention to 79% in the blue box, that would actually pass with the current 2/3 majority requirement for a property tax measure. So we also looked at other elements in terms of a library expansion and parks expansion. There's a general majority of voters are in favor of these elements. So these are important elements to consider if you're moving forward with a measure. If these elements are added to that, it could add to the overall support for a new tax. So in terms of the overall polling conclusions, the research revealed that Santa Clara voters have confidence and a positive sentiment towards their city government and overall higher ratings for the Park and Rec Department. This is something we did report back in July, but this is just kind of summarize that. And voters are generally frequent visitors to city parks and believe having well-maintained parks and access to open space contributes to their quality of life. And as I said, the broader parks measure to fund a range of improvements gains 2/3 support, which includes the ISC and CRC, not just the CRC and ISC alone. And then looking more specifically, there is, with the property tax measure, there is a limit in terms of what people will be supportive of in terms of that 2/3 majority. So voters are sensitive to cost. So that's another element that we'll talk to how that fed into our affordability analysis. And as I said before, other elements like the library expansion and park expansion would likely add to the overall support for a new measure. So in terms of that overall polling data, that helped us inform, what in terms of our affordability analysis we should focus on. So we focus on the property tax measure because in the polling data, it supported the 2/3 majority, and it also had a scale in terms of dollar amount sufficient enough to look at a project like that we had to look at. And when I talk about voters have a limit in terms of their overall support in terms of the cost, these dollar figures in the center of the chart, the $25 per 100,000 and the $20 per 100,000, that's the limit range that we have polled to we feel confident around sizing an affordability limit, given that that's the data that supports the poll data. So with that data, then we use that as our kind of a base case assumption to understand what sort of affordability limit we could assume the community would support. And just from a working assumptions basis, and this is going to be talked about tonight, we used 50% of that revenue that would go towards this project, but obviously that's a policy decision and open for discussion tonight. But that was our basis of assumption for, what sort of limit affordability-wise this project would have. Just catching up here. So then, in terms of our overall findings, the measure would raise approximately $300 million over 32.5 years, and that's in 2018 dollars. It's about just under $500 million in future revenue dollars. And that equates to about $300 million in 2018. And just in terms of like a mortgage style sort of upfront payment, if you finance that would be about $200 million. So I know not everyone's finance expertise, but that's just kind of how to think about it. And then the polling data does support adding parks and libraries, not only the ISC, in terms of moving a product like this forward or a tax measure forward. And the current design at $252 million is not affordable under the analysis that we've done.
From a city perspective, of course, we wanted to be able to also provide the context outside of the study of kind of what the needs are. And I briefly mentioned already that we do have the Kitchell report that's going to be presented to you in late March that has a range of costs of needs out there for our Parks and Parks building in the $150 million range. We also have the City Place Community Park that's currently unfunded, and we expect we're going to need another $30 to $35 million to build out that park. And of course, one of the things that pulled well was the library, but we don't really know kind of what the library needs would be yet for an expansion, if that's warranted, and what the cost associated with that expansion would be. So, many of the city infrastructure needs are unknown. We went through the whole list with you at the beginning of the presentation. And really, we need to determine how this process would fit with any other funding strategies or any taxing initiatives that would help us with some of the other city needs that we have. So some of the key questions as we move forward, and we have a few more slides in the presentation, is if we do move forward with the measure, how much of the funding should really go to the ISC and CRC when you put it in context of all the city needs? And if you read the the polling language that we used, it included all of elements, a lot of elements that would have to be funded as part of the process. How does that fit within other city funding needs? And if we are moving forward with this effort, complement or compete against some other ideas that we have for revenue opportunities within the city.
Thanks, Manuel. So just in terms of looking at the overall tax measure in terms of revenue and financing capacity, this is just an illustration of what a general obligation bond would look in terms of sizing. So we took a medium case, there is a high and a low case, 4% over that 32.5-year time horizon. As I said, it's about $500 million in revenue over that time horizon. And if you discount it just to today's dollars, it's about 300 million. So that could give you a sense of what you could spend that money today, how much project that would get you for infrastructure needs. And if you do finance that in terms of interest rate costs over that time horizon, that actually reduces your upfront capital. But in terms of advancing projects, financing is a method that brings these projects forward rather than delaying them in terms of revenue collecting, and also mitigating against the escalation or cost escalation with delaying projects. So that's just overall we have looked at different public and private financing options as well. So this is just an illustrative case, and in our final report, you'll see more of those options, how they work out. But just to remind you of overall concept, we looked at all the costs, not just design and construction, but the longer term costs as well that are critical to maintaining and keeping projects viable for users and the community, and also the revenue perspective. So with these two kind of streams of thought, then that gives us an ability to size a project over the long term. So we've been very kind of holistic in our thinking and our manner about how we think and look at this project, and make sure that if it does go forward, that it's thought in terms of how it's going to maintain longer term. And then in terms of the overall procurement options, how we're going to deliver a product like this, the concept of how you deliver projects is looking at what sort of risks you want to maintain and what sort of risks you want to transfer to the private sector groups to do. There's a range here. If you can see the red arrow at the bottom, design, bid, build is a traditional public agency procurement method, and that's one of the case studies we looked at. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have design, build, finance, maintain, and others like that. And basically what this means is you're transferring certain risks to a private sector partner to take on the responsibility for managing those, and typically over a long-term horizon. And typically those arrangements are subject to meeting certain performance requirements or delivery dates before they get paid. So there's an incentive structure about how you manage these different concessions, but the important concept is here, it's about risk transfer. So, typically with longer term arrangements that that manage asset over the long term, you don't get into a deferred maintenance or unfunded issues like you see at the ISC today. So that's just a couple of examples. And the case studies we used as well, we talked to different owners and to get their perspectives and bring those lessons learned to the Santa Clara situation. But I just want to bring up another point as well that came up in a lot of the community meetings and our own research with different groups, is that in all these cases that we're looking at, the asset, the land and the asset itself maintains control with the city. It's not a sale of land, it's not a sale of an asset. So the city maintains full control under all our cases we're looking at. Another important element to think about is the user fees and rates. Is not under any of these cases, we're not transferring that responsibility to a private partner. The city would maintain control of setting rates and fees. And it's also under all these arrangements are And what we would recommend is a competitive procurement process about how you deliver these projects. So it's a traditional public process needs to be run, but it's competed like any other public process. And just to kind of conclude that, just to conclude on our initial research based on our working assumptions so far is that the design, build, finance, maintain option for a project over $100 million would be the most efficient way to move forward the project, and it would generate about a 10% savings over the life of that. But that's obviously subject to your guidance in terms of how the overall allocation of a revenue measure would go. But in terms of wrapping up our final report, there'll be a lot more detail on that in terms of how we reached that. But tonight's just an overall high-level summary of our conclusions, and I think I'll pass it back to Manuel.
Thank you, Richard. So if we are going to proceed before November 2018 with a measure, there's a lot of work that's going to have to happen between now and November. Certainly additional polling will have to be done, and we have to determine how this effort would compete against other general fund revenue opportunities. We want to establish the process for new tax measures as well as those revenue opportunities, and refining that balanced language through the appropriate research as well as community outreach and engagement. And ultimately, a key question for the council would be how much funding would be actually allocated for this project for the $300 million or $200 million or $500 million, depending on what stage you're looking at the project. So that's going to be a key component, which ultimately could affect a lot of things, including how the project could be delivered, because the amount does change the best way to deliver a project. And that would be a key component of what is the right size project in the context of all the other city needs that we have. So as we're concluding the presentation tonight, we did have some key council questions that we thought would be important to talk about. Is there support for a right size project? I know we don't have the answer to you what the right size project is or some options for you, but is there support for a right size project in Central Park? Is there interest in proceeding with a possible measure for November 2018 for not just ISC and CRC, but also for parks and all the other needs that we discussed? And how does the council feel this aligns with all the other city needs and revenue opportunities that are needed to stabilize the general fund? And how are we going to prioritize those infrastructure needs? One key component that is a little different from the rest of these bullet points is that we did briefly discuss with you the operations of that facility. I know in the past it's been discussed that the new facility can reach 100% cost recovery because, as you can imagine, the bigger the facility, the higher the expense. And certainly there's a lot of knobs that had to be turned, and we provided a preliminary list of some of the changes that would have to occur. And we'd be interested to hear some perspective on the operations and some of those changes that would need to occur to try to get to a closer to 100% cost recovery. And of course, any other policy considerations. With that, that concludes the presentation, and we're available for questions and comments.
Okay, I think there'll be some questions. Councilmember O'Neill.
Thank you. Well, this kind of confirms some of the suspicions I've had. I love the idea, but I've used this project as a classic example of, in project management, it's called scope creep. So when the discussion about the various funding opportunities, and I think it was mentioned that over 400 letters or whatever outreach was done to possible donors, because I know one of the things at the beginning of the process, there was this sense that a lot of money, that all the costs of the new swim center could be raised, and that the city, this is what was said to me at the very beginning, that the city would only be responsible for maintaining and operating, which is not an insignificant amount. But so when I look at slide 11 and when it talked about the various numbers here, so like when it says fundraising up to $4 million up front, well, I believe we already have like a $4 million pledge. So I'm just kind of curious, out of the 400 plus letters of outreach to potential donors, did you have any sense, like, was anybody interested? I mean, because originally the thought was that with sponsors and naming rights, and as I said, the whole cost would be covered.
Yeah, well, to answer your question, I mean, we did that extensive outreach, and the $4 million that's seen here is $4 million that was already pledged at the last meeting. So there was no significant donor step forward other than what you've already seen. But just naming rights is a different opportunity. That's a commercial arrangement with a private partner to actually, has benefit in terms of sponsorship. So they're actually different revenue or funding sources. But in terms of the actual donations, that's the extent of what we discovered in our research. But there's also the elements of an endowment. So looking at setting up a non-profit foundation similar to what the library has today. That's also part of our research that we recommended. Today, there isn't a non-profit established just for this project. It doesn't have a donor base fundraising ongoing for this project because the project doesn't exist. But we recognize that clubs have a donor base and they fundraise. So that's when we talk about looking at the ways that we can partner together to figure out how to fund some of this project. We'd look towards that partnership to help leverage their expertise and their benefit as well going forward. But there's no major funding allocation that's going to support the overall project cost that we see today in terms of 252 million. There's no donor source right now for that in its own right.
Thank you. That's all I have right now.
All right.
I'll take it.
Councilmember Davis?
Richard, question. So when you did the polling, it seemed that they were more favorable if we put together funding sources with the library and other things, within the city. I mean, they were more for the ballot measure. I mean, and that's
Well, that was included in the
right.
ballot
But I
letter.
mean, that was more of that kind of came because I remember when you first did this outreach, we didn't talk about a ballot measure. You were just trying to get the temperature of what was going on out there. So I'm just curious as to when they started to say if you add more, if you beef up the ballot, that they would be more favorable to that. So is that a good sense or?
I'm not sure of the question exactly. I mean,
Okay, so if you came to me and you said, we're just going to fund the swim center, that's basically what you were supposed to go out and do. Now you're telling me you're adding a little bit more teeth to it, and they were more favorable to that idea because
Right.
now you have more funding sources for other things in the community.
Right.
So it's not just the swim center, it's other things that will be funded.
yeah, so we did poll on what funding the swim center, ISC, CRC alone, what does that get us? And if you look at a broader measure, what does that get us? And the broader measure was more favorable. That answers your question.
Yeah, I'm looking for that sense because it started out as one thing and now it's kind of city manager.
I want to be clear in responding to your question about the option of having more diverse sets of projects.
Right.
Isn't a function of it is more highly supported because it has more funding sources. Rather, it meets a broader range of community needs and interests. And so it was more responsive to residents' interest in having investment in those amenities rather than connected funding sources to those amenities.
Right, because in the beginning, it was like, well, not everybody swims, not everybody does this. But if you're adding on more teeth, I guess that it would more holistically hit the community better with a bond measure.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
kind of looking at that as an option. Okay, right size, can you explain right size to me? Is that just the two buildings?
Well, so basically what we did, our scope of work was to look at the current designs. The current design was 252 million. So we know that we can't afford that, or the city can't afford that. So we have like if you're trying to buy a house, you have a limit. You want to, whatever, you can't afford it, you have a limit. So we call that the right size project. So it's basically what's within your affordable range that you can actually meet. So that's what we call a right size project, but it hasn't been designed. We haven't redesigned it, but we just wanted to make sure that that the 252 doesn't work, but there's something below that does. So what we need to do now is if you want to move forward with the project and the measure, then better understand what that right size is, from a functional perspective, from a user perspective, so that you can achieve your goals and objectives, the city's goals and objectives, but it's within your affordability limit.
Okay,
So
so
that's
that's
what a right size-
that's kind of like our wish list happened, and now reality has set in.
Right.
And now we have to pick and choose how this is going to be funded. But along with funding, it's the sustainability. It
Yeah,
seems like
exactly.
you've looked at the sustainability of this because before we didn't know how we were going to take care of it, who was going to run it, what was going to happen, CIP. I mean, there was a lot of factors that weren't really discussed about it. It was just kind of how would this look?
Yeah, so we've basically come up quantitatively what that right size is, and
Okay.
we know what it is in dollar terms, but again, it's subject to how much you want to allocate towards a project. You know, if it's 50%, if it's 20%, if it's 70%, that changes your affordability limit. And also in terms of what we heard from the community as well was that the current design, you know, the feedback was it was too big for Central Park. And so this is actually kind of aligning with the community input, it's aligning with the polling, and it's aligning with the overall financial analysis. So, and all those things work together anyway. We didn't do anything separate from that. So we call it a right-sized project in terms of it works in multiple dimensions, and it's in our view the right way to move forward with a project like this.
Okay, I was curious, did you get anybody say to you, how come you didn't do a master plan of Central Park? Because they thought this thing was too huge on that one
Well,
corner
there was a number of
there?
questions about what happens when you close the existing ISC. There's land there, and that, you know, I think those questions came up, but you know, the city's already underway with the master planning effort of Central Park. So, you know, the city Park and Recs department were able to answer those questions, but it's also just kind of understanding, you know, what happens with that land when it becomes available. But
Okay, thank you.
Manuel, you had something?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to make a couple of quick notes. So from a right size perspective, I think, you know, Richard, thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive answer, but I think it is important to know that certainly PFAL was looking financially kind of what could be a right size project, but there are many other questions related to that as to, you know, how much program do you want to serve? How does it compare to the existing facility? And how much funding do you want to have available for all the other city priorities that you need to be able to have a ballot measure that moves forward? In addition to that, it's also important to note that the larger the project, the more funding that it takes, that the more funding you have to borrow up front to be able to deliver on that project. And as Richard mentioned, well, we talk about a $300 measure. If you borrow, say if you wanted to take all the money up front, that 300 would become 200 million. So as you're looking at a larger project, that leaves less funds for additional projects later on as you keep collecting money. So there's many contexts to a right-sized project. And you know, there's many layers that are going to have to be looked at to determine what that is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Mahan.
Yeah, thank you. On regard to the bond measure, if you were to go out, you know, to vote, would you have to say what funding went where? In other words, would we have to make the decision? Would it have to be revealed on the ballot? Like if you want this parcel tax or whatever it may be, that 50% of it's going to be spent on the International Swim Center and the rest on parks or libraries or other things? I mean, how do you frame that?
The first part of the research was to figure out, you know, was this project affordable? So part of the next steps Manuel talked about is doing further research to figure out, you know.
Oh shit! Sorry.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm sorry. This is my oncologist. I have to take it.
Okay.
I apologize.
I'll just answer the question here.
Okay.
But basically, the next steps is to continue with that polling research and the workshops to make sure that when you're moving forward with a measure, it includes the right elements in the right way. I don't know if there's anything.
Forward with the research, we would be able.
Can you go in the microphone, please? Thank you.
We would be able to answer those questions. We would put together what would be a specific measure that would go on the ballot, and
With specific numbers and
correct
whether or
and
not
ask
they
those
have to show a percentage, which was
Correct.
the question.
correct, and you know, see what is best suited for the city in that sense, as well as we also proposed focus groups to kind of discuss with the public in more in depth, you know, what that means for them, what that means for the city, and the feasibility of all of that.
I'll go ahead and ask some questions until Councilmember Mahan gets back. So first of all, I want to say thank you very much for what you've done. This is a tremendous amount of work with a tremendous amount of outreach in so many different ways in our community. And I heard from so many people that they got, you know, a letter, a phone call, you know, a text, whatever you were doing, you really outreach to a lot of people to get a really good idea of what our community's thinking about this really important project. So thank you very much to you and your army of consultants, and whoever you worked with did a phenomenal job. I just wanted to say that. Secondly, can you tell us the difference between the sales tax and the bond measure? Was it clear that the bond measure was the way to go as opposed to a sales tax, or was it the question on the sales tax versus the bond measure? or was it the same?
Well, you know, our polling experts here, but you know, just to answer first, I mean, the sales tax, you know, they had different thresholds in terms of what was level of support. So it was 71% for sales tax versus 79 for property tax measures. So in terms of moving forward, we want to make sure that you move forward in the right way, that in terms of the confidence, you know, you have the necessary support.
So,
But in terms of, you know, the language.
Yeah, and one thing to note with this is that the amount of funding that comes between the two different measures, sales tax versus a bond, you know, there, you can increase the funding as a result of a property tax in a way that may not necessarily occur with sales taxes. And that is also something that, given the greater support, 72% versus 79% for the bond measure itself, we also think it increases the chances of passing a measure specifically.
okay, as you can tell, we're not used to going out for bonds or sales tax or anything like that. I know our school districts are, but this is fairly new for us, so we want to make sure we get it right. One thing you talked about was the design build concept, how that would save 10%. Was that included in your numbers, that 10% savings
I mean,
of the 252 million?
No, that's basically how you look at the product overall. So the longer term perspective, you know, we looked at a range of different these different delivery models. So the 252 is kind of the baseline cost that doesn't change, and then the overall cost on top of that is what is saved based on how you deliver the project.
So what I got from you in this report was that, first of all, maybe the project as it was currently proposed, the larger project,
Yeah.
In and of itself would not be as attractive to our potential voters, residents, as a more comprehensive parks, swim parks, libraries type of bond measure.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Correct.
So, which may be a blessing in disguise for us, in the fact that there are so many needs in the city, as was outlined by our city staff prior to this presentation tonight. I think I've learned a lot myself about what we need. So, I mean, it's clear that we have a lot of needs in the community, but it's also clear that parks and swimming pools and libraries are also extremely important to our community. I mean, that's clear to me, and it sounds like it's pretty clear, you know, in your surveys that they're important. So if we decide that, yes, we want to move forward with a more comprehensive look at maybe a more comprehensive bond for more items, and we start to really hone in on what the right size of this project is, with the additions to, such as the additional park work, possible expansion of our libraries, and I know how I'd love to expand the Central Park Library and the Mission Library, and for a certain extent the Northside Library, even adding on. I think there's some really cost-effective, really cool ways we can expand. Maybe even include an arts fund in there for public art, you know, in different places as well. If we hone it in more, is there a possibility that we could increase the bond capacity so that we can actually do a right-sized swim center, a right-sized community center, and also fund all of the other, you know, parks needs, or for the most part, once we get the Kitchen report, and possible expansion of the libraries? Because I know, I assume you took a more conservative approach in terms of the 50% medium for the bonding capacity.
And our polling was focused, as you know, on the parks first measure, the broader measure, and that's the extent of kind of what we can say we can support, and the overall affordability limit and what sizes the tax measure is based on that data. So if you change the kind of the question, you want to do a broader with other needs, that needs to be tested and polled and researched, which would be some of the next steps that we'd need to do to determine, you know, what would get the 2/3 majority and also what the community would be willing to support in terms of if it was a property tax or a sales tax or a parcel tax. So we don't know the answer to that right now, but that's work that would need to be done. But our focus was on the ISC, CRC, and then the broader parks measure was what we polled on.
So I think that what you've done is you've really put forward what the tolerance level is of our community for what, and you've saved us probably a lot of time, money, and effort, because moving ahead with this, I want it to be successful.
Exactly.
And we all want it to be successful, because the fact of the matter is, if there's anything that goes wrong with that swimming pool, the fact is there's no parts. Right. And they have to be created or manufactured, and then the kids are not able to swim because they can't heat it or they can't use it. I mean, I'm there a lot, and it's in dire need of, I don't know how long it's going to last. And Santa Clara is really known for our swimming, and our swimming titles, you know, in the past and hopefully the future. So I think it's definitely an asset to our community. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, we have to combine that asset with other potential opportunities. So I look at this as a blessing in disguise. One other thing that Councilmember O'Neill brought up was the question about, is there any interest out there in terms of, you know, funding, supporting, naming rights, those types of things. The way I look at these things is that until there's an actual tangible project, mm-hmm. you know, available, then, you know, there's opportunities for many to get involved, knowing that, you know, maybe they get involved in terms of, you know, the elections up front and helping us, you know, make this successful, and then, you know, filling in some of the funding gaps that we may need, you know, in the future. So I think there's all kinds of opportunity. I want to take this to the next level, so we start exploring a little bit more, not just, you know, getting this project right-sized, and also looking at a more comprehensive, you know, look at a parks, library, swim center. Bond. And let me see if I had any other questions at this point. I just think that we definitely have to get, you know, more information. Then we can prioritize it with our other needs. But I'm going to tell you that for our community, in terms of the use of the swim center, the community center, and the parks and libraries, I mean, those are probably our most popular assets in this community. And I know, you know, pipes and electrical and infrastructure that we all have to run the community on are important. I'm not saying that they're not. But I really think that this is something that our community, if we put it out correctly, it's something that I think many people can get behind. Councilmember O'Neill, your light's on again?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of make a comment. I just want to throw out there, because one of the suggestions that I've made a couple of times, and this would go towards right-sizing, is to remove the theater portion of the project and to have that be a cornerstone of our new downtown with the partnership with Santa Clara University, because as a lot of you have heard me say, Dominus Vobiscum, one of the things that those Jesuits are wonderful at is raising money. And I've seen that firsthand.
We need lessons. We need some lessons. Yes.
Yeah, I know. I could use it. But you know, God bless Father Locatelli for many things, and that was one of the things he was able to bring a huge infusion of cash that has led to the enhancement of the national reputation of Santa Clara U. So that's one thought I would like to throw out there, is that that we could look at those kinds of that partnership with them. And I know I've spoken with them. I know Councilmember Davis and I have both spoken with fairly high levels, fairly high members of the administration of Santa Clara U, and they are interested in that possibility, because they're looking at having to rebuild Mayer Theater and some other things. So I think that could be something that could be a real attraction for a new downtown, is to have a more flexible performing arts center that we would share with the university.
So we're right-sizing as we speak, right? Okay.
Sizing right now.
And I do have some experience with bond campaigns and parcel tax campaigns, if it ever comes to that.
Okay. Councilmember Mahan, I think, did you hear any of the answer to the question that you had about the, okay. All right. Anyone else? All right. Again, thank you so much. Really appreciate everything. Is there any cards from the public? No cards. If anyone would like to speak. Oh, let me ask staff, do you have anything else before we go to the public? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Please come forward.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this is encouraging that we're moving this forward, but I had a few notes, and I definitely think, number one, we need to be cautious of cost recovery fees, because cost recovery fees, if they're not set appropriately, can impact a lot of kids who are barely able to afford these expensive programs as they are. And so we have to be mindful that if we just want to have 100% cost recovery fees, you're going to price a lot of kids out of the opportunity to swim, play soccer, or do what else. So just want to leave that out there. The school board is going out with a bond. I've interviewed with them, been interviewed, and I think we need to take that into account, that it's a $950 million bond. So we have to see how we are going to size up against that. The scope of the project is too big. It's just too aggressive for what we need. And my concern is that we are not going to get a second chance to go back in 5 or 10 years and say we need another bond because our libraries aren't right. We need another bond because we just can't get enough fees to fix all the parks in all the neighborhoods. So I think you have to look at the forest instead of one tree. And you've got to be able to encapsulate all the needs that we have today. And I do think if you do that, you're going to get a lot more buy-in from the general public. You know, the bond versus the property tax, how we do it, I think that's an interesting question, but I sort of feel like we're kind of behind right now. I sort of feel like we're playing catch up, and I think we need to expedite this and move it forward at a faster pace. What would a scaled down version of this project look like? What would that cost? What are the library needs? I mean, we're going to go and ask for fees for libraries potentially, but we can't answer the question of what are we going to do with that money. So I think we need to kind of put this put a little adrenaline into this project. So when we do go out to the public, we're crystal clear as far as what we need and why we need it and how we're going to spend their money. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we go to the next speaker, staff, when they're finished, could you give us an update on the timing? We are on super hyper speed on this. So give us just an update on what timelines we have to meet. Thank you.
Good
Yes,
evening,
good
Mayor
evening.
Gilmore and Council. I'm Suds Jane. I'm very pleased that the staff gave us a dose of reality in terms of our fiscal prospects in the future. It seems like the consultants had determined that the public appetite for a parcel tax to fund this bond measure would be $25 per 100,000, which would raise $303 million over 32 years in 2018 dollars. If you provided 50% of that to the ISC and CRC, that would be the right size project would be approximately 152 million compared to the 252 million that was proposed. And I think that, you know, the $25 per 100,000 will translate to about $250 to $300 per household to fund this. And I think the reason why grouping the ISC and the CRC with the libraries and everything gives more people more stuff that they would benefit from. You know, the ISC only benefits a certain percentage of the residents. And so grouping it with the library and everything allows you to bring more people on board. The problem is those projects will then take money away from the ISC. So if you start adding more things in, you get less for the ISC. I think the ISC is probably too big, and considering that a large number of the people that visit the ISC are not Santa Clara residents, I was wondering if perhaps we could try to partner on this project with some other cities around us. Have we talked to some other cities? Finally, I was hoping that the consultant would split out the cost of the individual components of this project so that we can then pick and choose what we wanted based on the prices. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not coming up to get married.
Oh, good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, we're gathered here. Okay.
First off, I want to continue to thank you. John Bitter, head coach and CEO of Santa Clara Swim Club. I want to continue to thank you for your support in keeping this project moving forward. Thank you, PFAL. Thank you, staff from Park and Recs. They've been tremendous. I do want to clarify one point. About 65% of our membership that swims at the ISC are Santa Clara residents. So it's not, we are not overwhelmingly from outside the area. Yes, I have branded Santa Clara into Monterey Bay, Milpitas, and Morgan Hill, but that's because that's something I internally did as a business. Again, we are here to do everything we can. I appreciate what you brought up, Mayor, about fundraising. Once it is built, it's a lot easier for our internally to fundraise through endowments and creation of that. Yes, it's very hard to say, give me $252 million to build something that's on a city property. They kind of are like, okay, build it, and then we'll sit down and have that discussion with you. So we will continue to do everything actively that we can. All three clubs have met internally, talked about things that we can do to help with cost recovery, about creating new programming, different things that we can do in outreaching that we can bring in more of the community, whether it's bringing in the schools and starting to teach them their learn to swim programs through the schools. We do that in Monterey Bay actually right now with the 5th graders, and it's been very successful for us. So it's something we would like to be able to do here with a new facility. So anything we can do, please, always, we're here. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else, please come forward. Good evening.
Hi there. Firstly, I was really surprised and somewhat disappointed that the swim center and the CRC, both of which are at such low cost recovery. I'm hoping that that's going to be significantly bumped up. If the citizens are having to pay, I don't know why those facilities are so low. I think that one thing you should ask the clubs if they're ready to pay 4 times as much right off the bat for using those facilities. If they're paying a quarter of the cost, they should be paying the whole cost. If we're paying for full cost recovery, they should be too. We have to pay it. I don't know why they shouldn't. You know, you can get out the crying towel for the kids, but I think we can get out the crying towel for the citizens too. We're paying lots of stuff. The whole thing, we haven't addressed parking on the facility. I think we should be focusing on other things. We have a whole infrastructure that needs to be supported. I think we haven't talked about the opportunity cost of putting money onto parklands. I think we need to do our homework before we all go out and play. Yeah, it'd be really nice to have a new swim center, but we need to take care of, and we need to refocus what we're doing on what we need, not what we want. Our roads are terrible. It's a good thing they don't make VW bugs anymore, because we got potholes you could lose them in. Our water system in the aquifer is failing because of droughts. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be gloom and doom, but it's the reality we have to deal with. Our budget's upside down when it comes to general fund, and it will be for 10 years. I think it's really fiscally irresponsible to want something. Yeah, we have been known as an in the past. You can go to De Anza College. Maybe we should partner with Mission College. Maybe you should take this whole thing and put it on that 35 acres. I don't think we need to do a swim center. I'm sorry. But I think we need to focus on what we need to do, not what we want to do.
Thank you, Deborah.
How much have we sunk into this? And tonight, when you vote on this, make sure you have to have a supermajority, because none of this money is budgeted. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, that's the end of our study session. Do we need to continue this? City manager?
Mayor, you had asked the question about a schedule?
Yes. Oh,
So-
thank you very much. See, I already forgot about that. It was in my mind. Okay. Yeah, because it's a pretty rigorous schedule that we have if we are going to look at the November 2018 election. So, yes, please. Thank
So
you.
just top of mind here, Manuel and I consulting each other. March, we would look at bringing forward a consultant contract to implement next steps. So we would look at a March date to bring forward an amendment. April, May timeframe, we'd also like to present to the council other revenue opportunities that we are considering to look at the 10-year outlook and see how we can mitigate the impact, as well as look at community engagement opportunities to refine any potential package associated with the discussion tonight and the composition of it. In June, do some public opinion research and come back to council with that information as it either competes or complements the other revenue opportunities, and then bring forward a proposed ballot initiative based on those findings.
Okay, so we'll have plenty of other opportunities to weigh in and further define, because we weren't going to answer all the questions tonight. It was just receiving this information from PFAL. And again, PFAL, thank you so much for all the outreach and community engagement that you did to get us this information. That's very valuable for us to make some really good decisions up here on this. So thank you very much. So that's the end of our study session. And if it's okay, I'd like to go straight into the council meeting. So I'd like to call the council meeting to order. If you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the Statement of Values. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with strength, courage, and will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interests of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so that we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs before all.
Thank you. Please be seated. City Clerk, roll call.
Caserta. Davis. Here. Holstad.
Here.
Mahan. Here. O'Neill.
Here.
Watanabe.
Here.
Gilmore.
Here. Is there a motion to excuse Councilmember Caserta?
So moved.
Motion second, lights on the motion. And that passes. Okay, Dominic voted against himself. Okay. Right?
Good, let's note that.
Okay, we'll go in.
Oh, must have been from last meeting or something.
From wherever he is, okay. All right.
He'd rather be here, wherever he is.
Wherever he is. Okay, next we have
Mayor Gilmore.
approval of minutes from January 23rd, 2018.
Mayor Gilmore. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, thank you.
No worries.
Sorry
May I
about that.
read the AB 23 announcement? Members of the Santa Clara Stadium Authority, Sports and Open Space Authority, and Housing Authority are entitled to receive $30 for each attended meeting. And the Statement of Behavioral Standards. The City of Santa Clara has adopted a code of ethics and values and behavioral standards for public meetings to promote and maintain the highest levels of conduct. This includes mutual respect, robust discussion, and allowing city business to be done in an efficient and consistent manner. Please note that, as a presiding officer, the mayor's direction in the matters of process and decorum should be followed, and that the use of the gavel indicates all conversations must conclude and everyone in attendance should come to order and attention. Welcome, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you very much for that. So we have approval of minutes, January 23rd, 2018. Is there a motion?
I said motion to approve.
Motion, second? Okay. And that passes unanimously. Next, under continuances and exceptions, we have the continuance of the Civil Service Commission interviews and appointment. Do we have a date certain for that? Or we're working on a date for that? Special meeting possibly? Is there a motion to continue this? Okay, there's a motion and a second. Member of the public, do you want to speak on the continuance?
I have a different continuance.
Okay.
Or exception.
So lights on the motion. And that passes unanimously. Any other continuances and exceptions?
Yes, I need to have it re-examine the action that was taken at the last meeting for the appointment of the city clerk. It was unclear under what authority you put into place a non-resident into the city clerk's position. It was unclear what authority you used to put that in place. Also, you did not declare a vacancy, and it also appeared you erroneously did not take a supermajority because it was an unfunded situation in having that person go there. So you need to re-vote on putting that person into place. Also, it was erroneously stated by a council member after public comment was closed that it was done in the past, that a non-resident was used in a chief of police position. Number one, that was superfluous information that was said to the community. It was also before the vacancy situation was changed by the vote of the public. So there's a very clear requirement how vacancies are to be filled, and that was not properly followed in the last meeting. So that entire situation for filling that vacancy has to be revoted because it was done improperly and not in accordance to the charter of the city of Santa Clara, unless you can tell me what section was followed, because according to the city charter, it was not done properly. So I'm asking that that vote be abandoned and the whole thing revisited. Thank you.
Thank you. The attorney, do you have a comment to that?
As we clearly explained in the memo, you acted under Charter Section 903, not under Charter Section 703. So it was not necessarily appointment of a, it was not an appointment of a vacancy to the elected city clerk position. It was simply appointing someone to act as city clerk so that we could actually function as a city government. We had to act under 903 to have someone perform the duties of the city clerk, and that was done under Charter Section 903. It was made very clear at the meeting that that's what the council was doing.
There's no debate here, and there was no money involved in terms of additional revenues that needed to be allocated for that position.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You are required per the charter to declare a vacancy when an elected official leaves their position. Why are you not
Miss Bress.
Excuse me, what
No,
section of the charter are you using that is
sit
not
down, please.
declaring
the
vacancy? No, you have to answer the
Bress,
question.
Please
what
sit
section
down,
of the
Bress.
charter
Ms.
are you
Bress,
not declaring?
Please sit down. Please sit down. He answered, please, Ms. Bress, please sit down now. Please. He answered the question, Ms. Bress. Ms. Bress, he answered the question. Please sit down. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other continuances and exceptions?
Well, I'd like to take that issue up for several reasons. The city attorney has showed that he is not neutral on this subject. He did not adequately answer why Councilmember Mann's request or suggestion that this required a supermajority vote because it does touch budget was not required. Even though the city attorney says it was very clear that you were acting under another charter rule, that wasn't clear. And Councilmember O'Neill's statement seemed to indicate that it was not following any rules. It was an exception to what the charter said. So that was not clear. I'll also state that at some point, nobody except for Tino, which I believe is your candidate as well, wanted this to pass, right?
I don't think this is on the agenda.
Understood. So this is why it goes under exceptions and continuances and reconsideration. So I'm asking, will anyone, and I know that this won't happen, but at some point for all the people watching at home, this is not how democracy works. You don't vote to get rid of your right to vote. But at the same time, I would like to ask if somebody on council would like to stand up and make a reconsideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan, you have a comment to that?
I do, because the only person or the only council member who could ask for reconsideration is one who voted with the majority in favor, and I voted against because I was fundamentally opposed to not getting this out on the ballot as soon as possible, but, so I can't make that motion.
This was this about the city clerk? You voted against the city clerk? Okay. We're talking about the appointment of the city clerk. I mean, the acting city clerk. That's what we're talking about. So, all right. So I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Next item on the agenda we have is the special order of business.
Clarification, I was asking about the
excuse
vote
me,
to put
please.
on the ballot our right, to take away our right to vote for city clerk. Clarification.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right.
Madam Mayor, I'd really like to clarify what happened here,
Thank you.
because there seems to be a
Well, there was two
misrepresentation.
issues there, yeah.
Two speakers have come before and misrepresented to the people at home what happened last meeting. What happened last meeting was simply asking the council how they wish to proceed with respect to the vacating of the city clerk position. Yes, it was vacated.
No, we're not going
And
to
stop
speak from
and
the
stop
audience,
interrupting
please.
and stop acting out of order. We have members of the public, for the people sitting at home, we have members of the public that come here every week and attempt to interrupt and prevent democratic processes by acting out of order. You saw an example of that tonight. They also misrepresent things that I say, and I think it's important that the people sitting at home understand that I am a resident just like they are, and I am doing my best to provide the council with good legal advice regarding the city charter. Under the city charter, yes, under section 903 of the city charter, the council has the authority, and I would say the duty, to appoint an acting city clerk, because we need to have a city clerk for your democratic institution to function here. And since the city clerk resigned suddenly, we had to act. And we advised the city council it would be a good idea to exercise the power granted to them under the charter, under section 903, to appoint someone who could perform the duties of city clerk. That person, we made very clear, does not have to be a resident of Santa Clara. They can just be any city employee or official to perform the duties of the city clerk. They would not be appointed as a replacement for the elected position. We then had the situation of what do we do with the vacated position? With the vacated position, we came back last time and informed the city council, these are your options. City council did not appoint anyone as city clerk. They are not required to appoint anyone as city clerk when there is a vacancy. They can either not appoint within the 30 days, in which case they must call a special election. We so advised them that that was one of their options. We also advised them that they could declare a vacancy and appoint someone. They did not yet do that. They still have 30 days to act under section 903. We wanted to give them an idea of the different options they had. All they did last week was direct us to bring back one of the options. They did not vote for any of the options. They're still within the 30 days, and they could still either appoint someone, they can still declare an election, they can still place a ballot measure on, or they can consider other options. So we have no violation of charters. We have no violation of supermajorities. We have no legal problem here whatsoever. Thank you.
And there were no funds associated with this, so there's no expenditure of any funds.
None. Ms. Yamaguma is being paid exactly what she was being paid before.
Correct. Okay. Can we move on now, please? Next, we have our special order of business, acceptance of the resignation of Chuck Blair from the Parks and Recreation Commission, declare one vacancy on the Parks and Recreation Commission for the partial term ending June 30th, 2019, and set February 20th, 2018 as a special order of business for promotion of the vacancy. And that's all today. So I have coming forward, is it Director Teixeira or Dale? Is he coming forward? Oh, and here he comes. Director Teixeira and the chair of the commission? Roseanne, are you coming forward also? What it says here. And I know we have a presentation as well, so.
Jim Teixeira, Director of Parks and Recreation. Is this for the vacancy first?
We can take the vacancy first and then the presentation. Or the other way around, we can do that too.
Go to the next slide.
They switch it. Okay, Parks and Rec Commission usually has 7 Santa Clara residents appointed by the City Council. We discuss and make recommendations about the parks, recreation, and the cemetery. We meet on the 3rd Tuesday of each month at 7:00 p.m., City Hall in the cafeteria, Low East Wing. The meetings are open to the public. There is 1 vacancy on the commission. So anybody that would like to apply, we'd love to have you.
Is there the deadline for the application? No deadline?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, we probably should set one at some point, I would imagine.
We'll get that information out and include
Okay.
it
Probably
in
as soon
the
as possible.
manager's blog.
Okay, so we'll get that information out. We'll push that out to the public as soon as we have a deadline
Great.
for the application.
Our commission focus and efforts on the parks, community input and research based on practices, recommendations on facility needs, design, amenities, landscape uses, policy recommendations, community recreation programs and services, community rec center, youth activity center and teen center, international swim center, and aquatics. Therapeutic recreation, youth and adult sports, cultural and performing arts, tennis, gymnastics, adult sports, and more, and the cemeteries. Citywide special events, the Art and Wine Festival, the holiday tree lighting, and volunteer recruitment. Please contact the city clerk's office for an application. And then we don't have a deadline. Just as soon as possible would be nice. Interviews will be held at the city clerk's office in the lobby to be determined. Additional information, Mr. Teixeira, Parks and Recreation Director, and his number is 615-2260, or just email him at City Hall. And then, or you can call the city clerk's office and email her.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And now the, did you have something for Commissioner Blair?
We do.
Were you going to say some words so then we can say some words about him?
I think,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go
Well,
ahead.
as all of you know, Chuck's been, I get choked up because I really like Chuck, a big part of the community. So it's really hard to say goodbye to him. But we know it's for the best for him. And we just like to thank him for all he's done. Now, somebody with some sanity.
It is hard to say goodbye to Chuck, and when he first told me that he was possibly going to be leaving the commission, and I said, no, you still have another year. And he said, no, seriously, that he was considering leaving Santa Clara. And I said, well, how can Mr. Santa Clara leave Santa Clara? How can Mr. Baseball leave baseball? And one of the first projects I got to work on with Chuck was installing a new scoreboard at Washington Ball Field. And that was one of the first projects that I got to work on. And that's actually before he was on the commission. And I learned a lot about sports and activities here in the city just by going around talking with Chuck and hearing the history. He was always, as I would say kindly, he was always on my case. Or on my cell phone. You know, I'd get these little buzzes and be, oh shoot, there he is. You know, yes, coach was what would always come up on the text. So anyway, we will definitely miss him on behalf of the Parks and Recreation Department. Again, our our Parks Division, whether it was, going out and learning how to put the mound and home base together properly, and all the things that he did with Art and Wine Festival, hopping in the truck and driving around picking up wine. Again, meeting people, greeting people, and he was always in the background, helping us and supporting us, and pointing out things when we may have been in need of doing it better. So we very much will miss him, and we very much appreciate all the service that he's given this city. So thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, go ahead.
Also, there are 5 large World Championship banners on the side of Washington Park, and it's because of this guy and what he did for our kids. And I know of nobody who's had an impact the way he has. It's so deep, and great job, Chuck. Very proud of you.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know what to say about Chuck Blair. He is Mr. Santa Clara, as was mentioned before. And if you ever wanted to know anything that has happened in Santa Clara in the past, Chuck has a memory that's incredible. And he'll be able to tell you all the details of what happened and why it happened. And he's just part of the fabric here in Santa Clara. And I can't think of a more appropriate commission that Chuck served on as the Parks and Recreation Commission. He loves the kids in this community. He will do anything for the children in this community, and he's got such a great heart and soul, and he's done so much for us. And throughout the years, when I saw him driving around at the Arts and Wine Festival, carrying, delivering wine and glasses, and giving people hell all the time about what they were doing right or wrong, and I mean, he is just part of Santa Clara. I know his parents are very proud of him. We're very proud of him and everything that he's done, and you're going to be a huge loss by moving out of the city. It's really our loss for everything that you've done and all that you've contributed to Santa Clara. I'm really sad to see you go, but I know that you've left part of you here that will never forget what you've done. And I'm going to miss most of all the discussions that you had with my husband about baseball being the superior sport over soccer. I think you won a couple of those, Chuck, but I'm never going to say anything. But anyways, you'll be greatly missed. Thank you for your wonderful contribution to Santa Clara. And we're never going to forget you, and I know you're going to come back often and visit us back here again, because this is your home, and it will always be your home. Councilmember Kolstad, and then Councilmember Davis.
I've known Chuck as a friend and a good coach for several years. There was a coach in another sport that once said, winning is not the most important thing in sports. It's the only thing. And Coach Blair brought in several championships, and there are young men all over this state that were under his leadership and guidance that'll never forget the lessons he taught them. And one was to win, and he did it, and his teams did it. And to me, that's the whole enchilada. Thanks a lot, Coach.
Councilmember Davis.
And Chuck, I'm going to miss you for your volunteerism in the community and BACA and what you've done in this city to take care of the youth and this bully stuff. And I mean, your riders, I'd be scared if you came up on me. I mean, but you have done so much for your community. I mean, just with Parks and Rec, but that was also one of the big things that I applauded you for doing, because you're a big guy, and if I don't know, I'd be a little nervous, but you've done tremendous work in this community, and we are going to miss you. I know you live kind of around the corner from me, and I saw that big moving truck, and I was like, whoa, he's going. He's really going. But I wish you all the best, and I hope that you come back and visit us, because we got all these things happening here. But thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you, Councilmember Mahan.
Thank you. I've known you, Chuck, for a really long time, since your nephews and my son Colin were at St. Clair starting in kindergarten. And the one thing I know most about you is, and respect you for, is not just your winning attitude and your competitive edge and your coaching your kids to so many championships and wins, but more you've taught them teamwork, dedication. You've always been kind to them. You've always shown them how to find their own way to become champions, whether they win or not. They're always champions. And I hope you will find enough time to ride your motorcycle and always keep the rubber side down and the plastic side up.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Neill.
Yeah. I also wanted to thank Chuck for his service, not just in our pony leagues, but in the school system too, as a coach for Santa Clara High for many years. And you know, Chuck's part of the reason why Washington Park is kind of like a piece of Americana. It's kind of like stepping back into another era. And the fact that, you know, we've had the World Series held there. And I think that that is kind of a really special place in Santa Clara, and kind of when people go there, when you feel like you're going back into when it was built into the 1930s, and some of that spirit of community is definitely has been enhanced by Chuck's devotion to this community in so many different ways that he has served. So our loss is Bakersfield's gain. So come back and visit often.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Watanabe.
Thank you, Mayor. Chuck, I have not had the pleasure of working with you like everybody else, it seems, in this room, but I do know of you and had a few interactions, and I'm glad for the time that I did had that opportunity. I think Parks and Rec was definitely the right commission for you to be leaving Santa Clara on, and I'm sure you're going to bring a lot of what you've learned from here in Santa Clara to the people in Bakersfield. And as Councilmember O'Neill just said, you know, Santa Clara's loss is Bakersfield gain. So good luck to you, and you definitely will be missed. So thank you for all you've done.
Thank you, Chuck. As you can see, it's unanimous up here. We're all going to miss you unanimously. So if you'd like to join us up front here, and I'd like to invite the council and the Parks Commission to come up for a photo with Chuck, we'd like to give you an award.
I just want to thank everybody, and it's been an honor and a pleasure. I'll always be a Santa Claran. I'll be in my heart forever, and I won't be far away. But and I'll be watching you too, so I could still get up here and give you crap just like Debbie can. So be careful. But thank you very much. And I'm going to miss everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck. And if you notice by our agenda, we had this council meeting just for you. Okay. Oh. All right, next item we have is the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? We have one item.
Motion
so-
to approve.
Motion second. Any discussion? Public, any discussion? All right, lights on the motion, and that passes unanimously. Public presentations, do we have any cards? No cards? Any member of the public, please come forward if you'd like to speak on an item not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none. Next, we have bids and proposals. Award of the Public Works contract for the North Side and Orbello Flow Meter and Force Main Appurtenance Project. Rebid to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, Anderson Pacific Engineering and Construction, Inc., in the amount of $2,141,600. Approval of an additional appropriation of $692,440 to cover the cost, and authorization to execute change orders up to 15% of the original contract price for the total not to exceed amount of $2,462,840. Questions, discussion, motion? Move approval of the bid. All right, and a second. Any discussion? Any member of the public? All right, lights on the motion, and that passes unanimously. Reports of members and special committees? Seeing none. City manager, executive director reports?
I just wanted to put a couple of announcements out in the record. The first is for the Stadium Authority meeting on February 27th, we had 2 items scheduled. One of those items being the budget study session. We're going to push to March 13th so that we can get the full packet out for that study session, and we'll proceed with the concessions. And I just wanted to bring to your attention on Open City Hall, there are 2 initiatives or community engagement opportunities online that we're seeking. One is for the city clerk position with both options that the city council put forward, as well as the council district ballot initiative. So you can find those on Open City Hall. They are active right now.
Thank you. Reports of actions taken in closed session. City attorney?
There were no reportable actions in closed session.
Okay, so that leads us to our adjournment, and we have a number of people that we'd like to adjourn in memory of. The first is Ather Ali, former Santa Clara community member. Ather earned a BS in psychobiology from UCLA in 1997, a doctor in naturopathic medicine, ND from Bastyr University in 2003, an MPH in chronic disease epidemiology in 2006, wow, and a MHS in patient-oriented research in 2014 from Yale University. He was the founding director of integrative medicine at Yale and was the first and only naturopathic physician credentialed by Yale Medical Group. He served as an assistant professor of pediatrics and of medicine, general medicine, director of the Yale Adult and Pediatric Integrative Medicine Clinic, medical director of integrative medicine at Smillo Cancer Hospital at Yale, New Haven, and an assistant clinical professor at Yale School of Nursing. Ather was a loving husband, doting father, thoughtful older brother, caring son, dependable friend, extraordinary colleague, and inspiring physician-scientist. Ather will be remembered for his courageous smile, his gentle and calm presence, his gratitude, humility, generosity, and compassion. He is survived by his loving wife, Smia, children Yasin and Rathan, brother Arshad, and parents Akbar and Faiz Ali. Also ask that we adjourn in the memory of Glenn Bolenbacher, former Santa Clara resident. Glenn was the first of 2 sons born on July 3rd, 1938 to Selden and Orpha Bolenbacher. Glenn joined the National Guard in 1954 and served until 1962. He attended San Jose Technical High School and junior college, choosing the profession of plumber. He was a member of the UA Local 393 and was dispatched to his first job at Ray L. Hellwig Plumbing on February 5, 1956, with a starting wage of $1.47 an hour. He spent his entire career with the shop and later became Ray Hellwig's partner in the company. Glenn was also an influential force behind the development of Local 393 Pipe Trades Training Center, and he was on the JATC board for numerous years. In January 1991, Glenn and Mr. Hellwig decided to expand their company along with their partners, Eldon Shreve and Lonnie Michaels, and founded Hellwig Mechanical. He had a passion for car racing, going to the lake, spending time with the boys at the American Legion Hall. He is survived by his son Chad, granddaughters Brittany, the princess, and Ashley, his image, brother Harold, Sherry, and longtime companion of Betty O'Brien. And Teresa, you have the next one.
Yes, I'm honored to speak this evening about Mary Gomez, who is a former Santa Clara resident and teacher. Mary was a 1939 graduate of Santa Clara High School and a 1943 graduate of San Jose State University. She taught second grade in the Santa Clara Unified School District for many years and was honored as Santa Clara's Teacher of the Year in 1972. Mary served on the City of Santa Clara's Parks and Recreation Commission from 1952 to 1958 and was instrumental in the development of many of our neighborhood parks. Mary Gomez Park and Pool are named after her. Mary was a member of the Santa Clara Women's Club for 70 years. She was also a member of the O'Connor 89ers, Delta Kappa Gamma, Santa Clara Sister Cities Association, and the Spanish Heritage Society. She is survived by her daughter Michelle and her cousin Don Calajon, along with many nieces, nephews, and great-nephews. And I just wanted to say practically all my life I've heard about Mary Gomez and have known of her. My mother held her in the highest regard as a fellow teacher in Santa Clara Unified. And two interesting things that her daughter Michelle spoke about. When Mary was a very young teacher, like 20, before she had gotten her bachelor's at San Jose State, she was assigned, she was teaching down in King City. And something she did as a 20-year-old, she insisted that the fence that was put up to separate the school where the town kids went to school versus where the farm worker kids, that fence be brought down and the schools be joined. And that she also spoke out against and fought against the treatment of the Japanese-American members of the community who were being interred. And she did that all at the age of 20 and 21 and brought that sense of justice and commitment to the community when she came back to Santa Clara. So rest in peace, Mary.
Thank you for that. Lastly, the victims of the shooting in Parkland, Florida. We offer our heartfelt condolences to the families and friends of the individuals who lost their lives during the shooting in Parkland, Florida on February 14, 2018. Our hearts are with the victims, the injured, and their loved ones. Let us please have a moment of silence in memory of the individuals who lost their lives during this terrible tragedy. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all for coming.